Hey, Sonograver here. Welcome back to the channel. I wanted to talk to you today about some observation I had been making over the course of the last few weeks, and that has to do with reading. So I've been reading really fiction, really science fiction, but this actually does apply to fiction and really in particular nonfiction. And what is that? Well, I've come across some books. We're just going to use two examples. Books are the first example. I've come across a book on the president, Thomas Jefferson. And I was looking across this book. It's a very thick book, high quality page, page count, the actual feel of the page. The book cover looks beautiful. It's a very presentable book. It looks really good on the display. But I was reading the preface, and then I was also reading the biography of the author, this supposed Jefferson enthusiast. And then I was reading the text. And not only was there text, but there was a lot of subtext. And the more I was reading the passages of this given book, I didn't buy it. This is just a book on the shelf. I was thinking, you know what? You say you're a Thomas Jefferson enthusiast, but you're really actually trying to paint this figure, this historical figure, in a very, very negative light. Now, the actual book, even on the cover, was, the accolades of the book was saying, this is a great representation of a very complicated man. So, referring to Jefferson, whoever, I think it was like New York Times or someone else. I'm not quite sure. But they were describing Thomas Jefferson as a very complicated man. I'm like, the word complicated almost always has a negative connotation. So when you say, oh, how is your marriage going? And then the person responds to you, it's complicated, or a relationship or a work situation, it's complicated. You know what that means. So first of all, Thomas Jefferson was not a complicated man. He was a complex man. He was not just a diplomat and a man of words, a politician. He was not just that. He was also into architecture. So involving things like science and mathematics. He was also, I found out, he was into vineyards and the cultivation of, wine that was, taken, that was the knowledge being, exported from France and taken into our country, that is the United States of America. So he was a very cultured man, and he was also very complex. He was very complex. I don't know everything about him, but I do understand this historical figure to be a multifaceted man. And the more I was reading this very specific text of this very specific book, he was really trying to paint this figure in a negative light. And it reminded me of another book that I read a long time ago that I actually just put the book down. I was like 30% in the book, and I just really wasn't understanding what this author was trying to do. I even forgot the name of this one author, but he wrote a book on Ronald Reagan. I didn't know anything. I still don't really know much about Ronald Reagan. Yes, I'm giving you that insight. I will be better about my history, I promise. But I was reading this book. I'm like, well, it's a biography. It's from the library. I'll just take a look at it. A lot of it on the outside of the cover. Never judge a book by the cover. The outside of the cover actually depicted a pretty genuine, pretty sincere idea of who this man was, even with his complications. And I was like, okay, it looks more or less to be a fair representation of this man I really know little about. But as I was reading the text, I really wasn't sure what the author was saying, in that I wasn't sure if he was for Ronald Reagan, because the cover really kind of depicted that this man was not an admirer, but someone who had a lot of good knowledge about the man. And then I'm like, okay, so maybe he's for Reagan. And then the text, 30% in, it was like, are you actually against Reagan? I don't care either way. I don't care if you're for him or against him, but be transparent about it. And the fact that by his language, I did not know what the case was, that kind of infuriated me. I just didn't know what he wanted. Now, I personally, with history in general, just be unbiased. No prejudice, no biases against anyone, even if you highly disagree with a historical figure or highly agree with this historical figure, whoever that may be. Just be impartial in your writing. I think that actually historical writers, writers of, biographies of such people really do need to be impartial. I mean, even if they have their own opinions on the person, that is a personal thing. So be impartial with your writing. So that's what I was looking for as a reader, not just with this one Ronald Reagan book. And I still don't know much about Ronald Reagan because of that book, because I closed the book, I turned it in. It was because it was partial. The language was manipulative. The language was partial. The language was trying to convince me of a thought, it was trying to have me think of something I would not otherwise have thought for myself or come up with myself. And I really don't like that when it comes to nonfiction. Same with this Jefferson book. It was like, you say you like Jefferson, but I really don't think you do. With the Jefferson in particular, the Jefferson book, it was more, this guy was actually this author was working out his own personal insecurities. He had a very complicated past, or he was very unsure about how the country is going or whatever. And, this man, is a husband and has 2 kids or whatever, but he talks like an academic, really unsure about himself, really insecure about himself. And he probably lives in some, upstate New York or some, yuppie city, if I'm being honest. But that aside, I don't know. I guess I could read his bio again. He was really projecting his own insecurities upon Thomas Jefferson. Now, the moral of this story, the moral of this video is, I don't care what you think about our president or our former president and one of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. I really do not care. But what I do care is people with the ability to project their own insecurities and their own opinions upon not just a historical figure, but just someone who can't speak for themselves because they have long been deceased. Or maybe even someone who's recently died. It's like they can't defend themselves against any pervasive opinion about them for good or for ill. Just even it being inaccurate. Like, they can't say, no, that's not me at all. You don't know me. Now, of course, people can also make the argument, well, social media does that anyway. Like, the person could be living and then the world might think such ill of them and they can't even defend themselves because no one's going to believe them. I get that, but at least they have the ability to say something in front of a camera, in front of a phone or, on a podcast or whatever. At least they have the ability to speak for themselves. People like Thomas Jefferson, Ronald Reagan, they can't speak for themselves. So that's kind of what I've come across, is that you really do need to pay attention when it comes to nonfiction, in particular nonfiction dealing with historical figures or any figure. Could be a living figure, someone who is famous. Really look for impartiality with the writing. Really look for something that is not prejudiced, that is factually based, because it's not in the author's place to write whatever they think about them as if it were facts, if it was factual. Like, oh, this actually was this is about Thomas Jefferson. This actually is about his life. It's like, you don't really know that. Like, that's your supposition of how things were with this man's life, but you don't know that. In fact, chances are, because we've had so many years between this book being published and the life of Thomas Jefferson, you don't know. And likely, I would say it's likely highly inaccurate of the actual man himself. So it's the real example I'm using with Thomas Jefferson, but just kind of look at this from any point, like on a politician, political figure, a celebrity, like a music celebrity, an actor, an actress. Just kind of be aware of how biographies are written, and really be especially aware if it's someone's own projection of their own life and their own opinions upon this person and this person's life. So that's the first thing. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about was not books, but book reviews. So recently on my channel, I had done a spoiler-free review of Frederik Pohl's Gateway, a science fiction classic. And after that review, I was thinking, I wonder if YouTube has other reviews of this book. And like, what are other people saying? What are other readers saying? And I was going through probably about 3 or 4 reviews on YouTube of this one book, and I wasn't really that impressed. Out of the 4 of them, maybe 5, I think I went through 5. 2 of them were pretty neutral, and actually one was positive, which was great. But I remember 2 or 3 of these reviews being very, I would say, opinionated in an inaccurate way. So what does that mean? Well, one example is that they were really dissing on the protagonist. As I mentioned before in this book, the protagonist, Bob or Rob, is a very troubled young man, and he does very questionable things. He doesn't really live a good life. He's got a lot of moral quandaries, and yeah, he does something terrible. But because that is the case with the book, a lot of these reviewers, these readers wanted to project their own opinions of like how bad this person was. And one example, I won't forget it. One example was this one man who said, "Oh, this person is so egotistical and so highly narcissistic." And I was like, "This guy is a troubled man, but he's not narcissistic. He's just out for himself in a selfish way, but he's not narcissistic any more than anyone else in that story was." And I didn't even read the narcissism. So it was like, okay, the book reviews, you kind of, even as a reader, even reading fiction, you have to be careful to at least try to be more impartial and less opinionated. Because, if you're opinionated in your book reviews, like if I give more reviews of stories, I don't want to dissuade someone from reading a piece of fiction if I am giving an inaccurate version of the character, the interpretation, and a wrong interpretation of the character or the story itself, and thereby I dissuade the reader or the prospective reader from even reading the story. Like I convince them not to read the story when the information I give is inaccurate. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, is just whether with books or book reviews, just be a little bit more careful with how you're hearing what they're saying. Like the book reviewer, just kind of pay attention. Okay, what are they saying exactly? Is this true, or is this a very strong impression, or is this just an opinion that might not be accurate? It's very hard to tell with fiction, but especially with nonfiction, and especially with real people, just always look for text that is impartial. No matter what you think of the person, no matter what you think of the historical figure, always go for impartiality when it comes to these things. So that is my observation with reading and also with reviewing, looking at book reviews on YouTube and seeing what they have to say. So anyway, I hope you like that. Until I see you next, keep producing and preserving that good art that you love, and I will catch you later. Thanks.